Hi guys, welcome to your online wreath making tutorial. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you supporting us. We know it's not the same this year and you can't make it in person, but we're going to make sure that you still have a beautiful door wreath, and I'm going to show you how. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to talk you through what's in your kit. So you're all going to have one of these and you've all got the same materials. So you're all going to have one of these, which is a 12-inch brass wreath ring. Inside here you're going to have the blue pine spruce, which is what most Christmas trees are made out of. You're going to have your moss, and then you're going to have a mixture of different foliages, and I'll talk you through those in a second. You're going to have wires, and you're going to have one of these. This is really important, so we're going to need this all the way through. And then there's a few dried materials and then the decorations that we're going to do. So I'm going to talk you through all of the individual foliages and just explain what they are and how you can use them, and then we'll get to it. So I'm just going to put this to one side for 1 second, and I'm just going to talk you through everything that I have here in front of me. So you're going to need a sharp pair of scissors for this, and that's all you're going to need. You might want to put down a mat or some paper, something like that, just so that you don't make too much of a mess. But everything is dry, so it can be swept up or hoovered at the end of the night. So to start with, we have some eucalyptus. We have two varieties of eucalyptus. So we have this one here, which is the normal one that you guys will buy from me quite often. And it smells delicious. And then we have this one here, which is like a longer kind of sort of floppier variety. So that would be great to sort of add some nice different textures to your wreath. We have some pinus, which is this foliage here. So this is nice and thick, nice and Christmassy. We have some dried materials, some pampas and some thyme. So this will again add just another texture, another scent to your wreath. We have some berries, and we have this foliage here, which is a darker green. This will just add a nice different colour to our wreath, and this is called pistache. The decorations are going to be very natural this year, so we've got the dried orange pieces and the pine cones, and then finally we have the moss, and then this is what we're going to use to base our wreath, so this will be underneath all of our foliage. Okay, so this is the easy part, guys, and this is also the most important part. So you all have moss in your kits, and you also have one of these. So this is the real wire that we're going to be using throughout to attach all of our foliage to our ring. This moss is going to act as a base, but it's also going to water the foliage. So make sure that this is kept moist throughout December, so that the foliage is kept watered and therefore will stay as fresh as possible for as long as possible. So all we need to do for this is just break a little piece off in your hands. It's going to be quite damp, but that's what you need it to be like. And we're just going to wrap it around the front and the back of our wreath. Give it a good squish so that it's nice and tight on there. And then this is where we're going to use our real wire. So this is the starting point. So I always find it easiest to use the hand that I write with. And what you want to do is pull that as tightly as you can and make sure that the moss is really nice and secure in there. And don't cut this until the end, okay? So what we're going to do is repeat the process all the way around. So make sure you're putting enough moss to cover the ring, and then wrap the real wire around and secure that in there. Okay, so continue to do that all the way around. So you don't need too much here, but just make sure that it's going to cover the ring. And it doesn't have to be neat and perfect, because once we put our foliage on top, it's going to bring in any of those little straggly bits that we have there. So continue to cover the ring all the way around. If you have any spare, don't worry, because we can always use that later on. But it's not essential, so don't worry if you use all of your moss. Okay, so here's a closer look, guys, of what we're doing here. So just grab a handful of moss, make sure it's nice and tight around your ring, and then we're just going to bring the real wire around as tightly as we can and secure that into place. So making sure it covers the front and the back, and place it on there like so. As I said earlier, it doesn't have to be neat. The foliage will just add to this, and we will continue to wrap it around, so any straggly pieces that you have will be tucked in eventually. Okay guys, so this is what your wreath should now look like. So we've got moss on both sides. As I said before, it's not neat, it doesn't have to be neat. The next stage is to add the foliage. So this is going to be the main part of our wreath making tonight. And that will bring in any straggly bits that you've got. You can trim them off if you want to, but it's really not essential. And at the end, we won't see any of this moss anyway. So all of our foliage is going to cover the entire ring, and you won't be able to see anything. So this is what we should have so far. And then we're going to get on to the main part. Okay guys, so this is the main part of our wreath making tonight. So what we're going to do now is prep our foliage. So I've cut everything into smaller pieces so that it's easier for me to use. For example, this kind of size here is what we're going to be aiming for. So I've trimmed down all of my foliage and I've put it all into sections. You can do it as you go, but it is a lot easier if you trim it down and you can just grab and go as you're wrapping it around your wreath. So what we want to do here is just grab maybe 3 or 4 pieces of different foliage in one go and make yourself a mini bundle of greenery. So for example, something like this sort of size would be fine. Don't worry if the stems are too long here, you can just trim those as you go. So cut it all down so it's the same sort of size, and this is the size that we're going to be aiming for. Now this is the fiddly bit, but once you get going you will be fine. So we need our real wire, and as I said earlier, it is always easier to use in your writing hand and then hold the foliage in the opposite hand. So I always start at the bottom and then I will twist as I'm going and continue to place the foliage in front of me. That's just the way that I find easiest. You can find a way that works for you, that's fine. But if I show you how I do it my way, and then once you get into the swing of things, you'll just get into a flow and you'll soon see that it will come together nicely. So hold your foliage nice and tightly together. And what we're going to do is place it directly on top of the moss. So don't worry to begin with if it doesn't look how you want it to. When you get towards the end, you will see how it will all come together and it will all start to look like a wreath. So this is the fiddly part, and we need to make sure that this initial wiring here is as tight as it can be so that it doesn't come undone. So go around there sort of 3 or 4 times over the stems so that they're not going to fall off of the moss. So we're going to keep this real wire on the entire time, and we're going to cut it when we finish the whole wreath. So don't cut this until you finished, okay? So just leave that there for a minute, and what we're going to have here is just our foliage. It's not going to fall off. So this is going to be hung on the door outside in all different types of weather. So make sure that it's definitely not going to fall off and it's nice and secure. So you can pop that down for 1 second and just repeat the process. So grab yourself a little bundle of foliage. Make sure you've got lots of different textures and colours going on there. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in. You don't have to do it the same as I am. If you want to add some dried flowers in now, you can. So just add a little bit of pampas. I've just cut this down, so I've used 1 stem of pampas and I've cut it into 3 different sections. So I'm just going to pop that in there on top, and then I'm just going to trim that down as I did before so that it's all the same length. And now this part is exactly the same, except for we want to go ever so slightly towards the outside of the wreath. So the way that we're going to make this is 1 in and 1 out. So once you get going, you'll realise the pattern and it will get easier. So I'm just going to place this over the top of the wiring. We don't want to see any of the mechanics here, okay? So we're just going to pop that over the top and then ever so slightly out towards the outside of the wreath. And then make sure you're wrapping that as tightly as you possibly can so that none of the foliage is going to fall out. So as I said before, maybe 3 or 4 times will be fine. And then we're going to have the wires here, and then the previous one is going to be covered up underneath. So the next time we go in, we're going to go ever so slightly in towards the centre, and then so on and so forth. So I'm just going to continue to make little bundles here. You can mix it up as you go with the foliage that you use. You don't have to use it all in one go. And if any of the pieces you've got are too long or you want to trim those down, you can just cut them as big or small as you want to. So I'm just going to put another little piece of pampas in there, just as a little tiny piece, as a nice bit of texture. And then I'm going to cover the wire again but make sure you're moving down, so don't try and clump it all in the same place. So make sure you're placing it there so that you've covered the wire in the first place, ever so slightly in towards the center, and wrap that round 3 or 4 times so that it's nice and tight. And then my next bundle of foliage is going to go here, so if you feel like it's a little bit gappy, that's fine. We can manipulate the foliage and put it wherever we want to get the shape that we're looking for. So I'm just going to repeat this process all the way around, making sure that I'm using all my different varieties of foliage. It's nice to have a few longer pieces in there as well, so if you want to leave those nice and wispy, that's fine. And then you'll have nice long pieces throughout your wreath. So I'm going to pop that so that it goes out towards the center, at the outside, sorry. What I'm going to do here as well is put in a longer piece of pampas at the back, because if you can see what I can see, there was a gap here. It's easier to do it as you go rather than go back at the end. So if you have got any gaps and you're not quite happy before you start the wiring process, you can just alter it so that it's the shape that you want it to be. So I'm quite happy with that now, so I'm just going to put that into place here and continue to wrap that round so that it's nice and tight. And none of this should be moving now, so this is all nice and secure. If you give it a little tug, it's not going to go anywhere, okay? So this is what we want to aim for all the way around, and then once you get a nice shape going on, you'll realise it'll all come together and it'll all start to look nice and full. So just rip off those pieces of foliage. I'm not going to put any pampas in this one, I'm just going to leave a little gap. Trim that down, place it over the wire, and continue to wrap it around like so. Okay, so now you know the basics of what we're going to do with this. I'm just going to let you guys carry on. You can pause the video at any point and go back to it if you need to, and take your time. It's not a race. So I'm going to leave you guys to it, and then we'll come back to it when we need to do the decorations. My wreath now, so this is the idea that we're aiming for. So you want all of your foliage going in the right direction, you want your whole ring to be covered so you can't see any of the moss and you can't see any of the ring underneath, and I've just repeated the process all the way around until I got to the top. The last piece of the wreath is fairly tricky, but all you need to do is make sure that you just pop your last piece and wire it underneath the first one. So the first one should overlap so that you can't see where the last one ends. So this is where we should be now. If you need to pause this video and go back and repeat any of the process, you can. And I'm just going to teach you how to put the decorations and then finally the bow. Okay, so this is the last part of the wreath making for tonight, and this is where we're going to decorate our wreath. So you have some orange slices and some pine cones. If you have any other decorations at home, you're more than welcome to wire those in as well. Once you've wired 1 or 2 things, you'll realise that the process is very similar, so you can use the same techniques for other things as well. So I'm just going to show you how to do these. I always do 2 at the same time. You can do them individually, you can cluster them together, however you want to. So have a little think about where you want them to go on your wreath. And what we're going to need to do is grab 2 or 3 wires at the same time. The reason for that is to add stability so that they are going to be nice and strong. And what you want to do is push the wires through and out the other side of the fleshy part of the fruit. So what you want to have is them like this, and then what we're going to do is fold that wire in half and then twist it around there like so until you've basically got 1 wire. So you're going to twist all of that together like this, and then this bit here is just going to act as our fork to put into the wreath. So you can trim that down a little bit if you want to, but what we're going to do here is push it directly through, so you can find yourself a little space for it. Don't be afraid to move the foliage out of the way. Push it through and then wait till you can feel it come out the other side. And then what we're going to do is just nestle that in there and then pull the wire through and push it back against itself so that it's not going to go anywhere. I'll show you another one and I'll show you underneath the wreath so that you can see the wires coming out the other side. Okay, so as I said before, grab 2 or 3 wires, grab your fruit, push it through the fleshy part of both pieces out the other side. Then we're going to fold it in half and wrap it around itself nice and tightly. So what you'll need to do now is find yourself a gap in your wreath, push the wire through, so it helps if you hold the wreath up at this stage so you can feel the other side. And I don't know if you can see from there, but the wires should come through the other side here, and just pull those through as hard as you can. And then what we're going to do is just wrap them and tuck them in nice and tightly. It doesn't have to be neat, it doesn't matter where you tuck it, just so that these are not going to fall off when we've got some bad weather during the winter. So give them a little tug. If they're not going to go anywhere, then they're nice and secure. So repeat the process all the way through until you've got all of your fruit on there. You can just use individual pieces if you want to. You may not need as many wires because they won't be as heavy. So if you're just going to use them on their own, you could just maybe get away with using 2. And then just wrap those around. You can pause and rewind this video at any point if you need just a minute to do these. They can be a little bit fiddly. So I'm just going to spin my wreath around here and pop this one in here. So I'm just going to find a nice space for it. I'm going to feed it through so that it comes out the other side. This is tricky, this part, and you might not always get it right first time, but just keep trying until it comes out the other side. There are a lot of things in this wreath now at this point, so it is quite hard for you to find a space for the wires to come out the other side. But once you do find it, wrap it around, tuck it in, and make sure that's not going to go anywhere. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing with the pine cones, but these are a little bit fiddly. So use your wires, and then what we're going to try and do is put the wires through this bottom layer here. So you want to find the ruffles that move, like these ones here, so that you've got a little bit of flexibility. Push that in there like so. Wrap half your length of wire through the ruffles, and then pull it nice and tight so that you know it's nice and secure, and then leave half the length here. And we're just going to repeat what we did before. So find yourself a little gap. This is the fiddly part, but once you do 1 or 2, it's okay. Push it through, and you can kind of like nestle these in, and then move the foliage around a little bit to manipulate them to where you want it to go, so they can just sit in there quite nicely. So I always do these individually just because they're quite heavy. So if you want to cluster them together, that's fine, but make sure you do them one by one. Some of them are quite large like this, so you might need a few more wires. So I'm just going to repeat that for you. Wrap those around the bottom layer of the pine cone. Make sure you give it a nice pull to make sure it's nice and tight, and then leave half the length of wire here, and then find a space for it in your wreath. As I said before, it is easier to lift it up sometimes. Feed it through and make sure it's not going to go anywhere. So repeat the process with all of your decorations. As I said, if you have anything else at home like baubles or anything that you have as a tradition that you've had in your family for some time, or something the kids have made, you can just use these wires to do the same technique, making sure it's nice and secure. So whatever it is you're wiring, as long as it's secure, it's not going to fall off. Push that through there, pull it through the other side, and then just find somewhere to wrap it around and tuck it in. And there we go. So I'm just going to show you this here. All of these decorations are in place now. They're not going to fall off. Make sure you give them all a nice little tug. You can repeat them if it's not tight enough, that's fine. You don't have to just leave it where you put it. If you're not happy with it, just move it and put it somewhere else. And then I'm going to show you how to finish with the bow, and then we are finished. Okay guys, so we should have our finished wreath now. All we need to do is put the bow on. So I'm going to show you guys how to put the bow and where to put your bow. So you can either, by now you should kind of have an idea of the top and the bottom of your wreath, so have a little look at it, get someone to hold it up and see what you think is the top and the bottom. So I'm going to go for this as the bottom of my wreath, and I'm going to hang it on the door from here. So you can either put your bow at the top and it hangs down, or you can put it at the bottom and it hangs down. So I'm just going to show you guys how to do that now. I'm not going to put a bow on mine, I'm just going to have the hanging tails, and you can do either or, so it's entirely up to you. You all have chosen your bow colour for your kit, so that will be included in your box. And you'll all have around 2 meters or so of length, so you've got enough to make a bow with, or just have the hanging tails. So the tails are the easy part, so I'm going to show you how to do the bow first, and then I'm going to put the tails on my one. The bow is quite tricky to do, and this is the part everyone gets stuck on. So get the length of ribbon in your hands, and then we're going to make a loop, and we're going to pinch it in the middle, and then we're going to loop the other side. I'll show you how to do that again, but basically you're just going to have a traditional bow, and you're just going to kind of loop it like bunny ears and then attach it in the center. So get the length so you've got a similar amount either side. You're going to make one loop. You can adjust these afterwards to be as big or small as you want to, and then you're going to bring the other side in so that you have 2 loops here, and then you can make them slightly larger. Once you've got control of that in the middle, you can kind of adjust them as big or small as you want to. So if you're going to go for a bow like this, pinch it in the center, and then grab your wires again, and what we're going to do here is just very simply wrap it around the center to keep that bow in place. And then, as we did previously with the decorations, we're just going to push that into our wreath there, and then let it hang at the end. So this is what the bow will look like if you want a traditional bow, and then you can just trim these off at the end and just tidy them up, and we'll just push this directly into the wreath. And then I'll just quickly show you guys how to just do the tails, which is obviously going to be a lot easier than a bow, and I personally prefer these just because I like the way that it kind of hangs in the wind. So I'm just going to leave those, I'm going to cut them down in a second anyway. I'm just going to leave those nice and long for a minute. I'm going to go back to the real wire that we used at the beginning. I'm just going to wrap that around there a couple of times. Doesn't have to be that many times because the ribbon is nice and light. So I can't remember where the top and the bottom was now. What I'm going to do is just wrap that around so that they kind of hang here. I'm going to bring that through. Be careful with your foliage here, make way for the wire to come through, so just kind of part it to one side. You can see what I'm doing here. Pull that round just a couple of times, it doesn't have to be anything major, just so that it's not going to fall. And wrap that around there, and then we're just going to trim that off at the back. So cut that off, and then we should have some nice hanging tails here. I'm just going to trim those down so that they aren't too long, and if you wanted to, you could put it off to the side here. You can have the bow wherever you want to. You can do whatever suits you really. If you don't want a bow altogether, you don't have to. You can use this to hang your wreath up, and if you don't want to do that, to hang your wreath, we're going to go back to the real wire, and we're just going to lift our wreath up again, and obviously this is going to be at the top. And what we're going to do is try and find the original ring underneath the moss. So just push your finger through and make like a kind of little gap. Push that through there, and then depending on how long your hook is on your front door, just get yourself a little bit of length there and trim that off. And then I'm just going to simply tie that in a knot. Just be careful of your fingers because it is a little bit sore if you do it too tight. And then I'm just going to trim off the ends there. You won't see this bit, this will be the bit that goes on the hook. I'm just going to pull that bit round, and then you can simply hang that on your front door like so. So I'm just going to trim those bits off there, and then we're good to go. So that's what your wreath will look like at the end. Okay guys, so that's the end of your tutorial tonight. We hope you've had a nice time and you've made a nice wreath, and we'd love to see your creations, so don't forget to tag us. And we just want to say thank you again for supporting our small business during this hard time. I know it's been a rubbish old year for everybody, but hopefully next year we can come back bigger and stronger than ever. So have a nice Christmas guys, thank you again, and take care. Bye.